next week, I'll come up with usually two forms for all the companies. So that's like top priority for everybody, so I have to help with that. That's the main part of my job.
Alright. It's doing something.
What time do you get off?
What's that?
Scheduled to work 8 to 5. If it's I might stay later, and I don't work weekends.
Oh, how dare you, Maria? How dare you?
Only for the month of January.
Yeah, it better be. I wanna see you here
I
every
got
Sunday night,
those, 70
Sunday night,
inch
Friday night, Wednesday night.
I was
Man.
trying to look up on eBay an old Mondale.
I need
Sticker
that.
to put on the back of that old car.
Hold on, die.
Huh? Well, it's called a midget, and it's not much bigger than a go-kart, but it's a car.
He said it's called a midget.
You say it was an MG?
Yeah.
When I was in England for a short time, I had a Triumph Spitfire.
Wait, you said MG?
Yeah, those are pretty cool.
That was a fun car.
Yeah.
You said
This
MG.
one's actually a little
You
smaller,
said MG.
Yeah,
and that's a small
I
car.
thought he said
Yeah.
midget.
I remember used to look up at the curve.
Oh. Cause he said midget, and so I'm like, Chris, he's talking about you. Hi, Bob.
Hey,
I just saw it right now.
Oh, you may be on
I
the
was
way.
thinking about the next kind of chips I'm gonna get.
It's almost everywhere, but,
Hi, Bob. Sad to see you feeling bad. I didn't lose anything. Need poisoning, poisoning, you're feeling like it's so long.
Pass it out.
Yeah,
you know that.
God, I was gonna say. Oh, yeah.
Law that
Crunchy.
showed
Huh?
me,
Are you a,
couple pictures of it.
are you pro? Well, here's my question.
what's that?
Do you believe that Americans should have guns?
Yeah.
Well, here's a message from creepy Uncle Joe. That's irrational. That's irrational.
Well, he's irrational too.
See, Governor Haney got that church down in Texas.
What's that?
You're gonna learn to see it coming here, get that church down in Texas.
Well, and just last September or so, Joe Biden was down in Texas when the governor signed a law saying you can do concealed carry in churches in Texas. And then he said, this is completely irrational. It's idiotic. Then,
Wow.
God used that guy to stop that thing right there, 50-foot shot to the head like that, moving target.
It's incredible.
Hi, Bob.
And I don't know, I didn't really see many reports on it, but
True, some of this stuff is.
I think they said there was a couple hundred people in that church.
Yeah, when he did that. So,
Probably saved a lot of lives.
Okay. Oh, it's fun reading, that's for sure.
As the Iranians said. Or
You know?
revenge.
I guess we're set, we can pray, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, God, thank you so much for a place to meet today. Thank you for each one that's here. Thank you for the new year. We do pray you would bless, watch over, Lord, help us to use it for your glory. And you would just pray that you bless our time, our fellowship this evening, bless the time we spend in your word. And again, open up your word to us, guide us, and direct us to your spirit, Lord. Thank you for the refreshments. Bless them as well. And again, help us be a blessing to somebody through the YouTube broadcast tonight as well. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, happy New Year, everybody.
Did you get the YouTube?
Yeah, finally. Finally. Working at it.
You know, there's also some sorrow in here.
Gross.
But,
Not everyone likes it.
you know, that,
I don't see why anybody likes it.
you're talking about that church in Texas, you know, they,
No, how do you know my password? Huh? You're morning. So they both have 3 hours for it. One day morning. Don't look at my days in it.
No, it'd be into a week.
You were talking about that church in Texas. I guess that guy had been in there asking for time for handouts. Or some kind of what prompted it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I saw one comment somebody had, I posted some of that online, and somebody had put a comment saying something to the effect of, the first guy who couldn't get his weapon out, I think it caught on his clothes or something. That guy was the first one shot, I think.
Really?
This guy was saying, well, he might have antagonized him. If he hadn't done that, nothing would have happened. He was implying.
Yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, a guy brings a shotgun into a church service, pulls it out, and the fact that somebody starts to pull a handgun out of their holster antagonizes him and makes him shoot. When the guy pulled a shotgun out and starts to, pull the, because it wasn't that a pump that he had, I think, and starts to do that, starts to aim, that.
I don't remember if it's up or something like that.
How dare you?
Here's the thing.
So, yeah, so that was, obviously the guy was trained, but still from 50 feet away, that was an extremely good shot. I think the Lord guided him. I was, let me see if I can get it up here, on the, well, it was on here. I don't know where it went to.
What, it was a 50-foot shot?
Yeah, I read somewhere it's 50 foot. I first thought it was 30 foot, which still is a good shot at 30 foot.
Yeah.
But 50 foot, a moving target and a commotion and everything with, and reacting within 6 seconds of the first shot. Of course, he knew something was going on. It's just that within 6 seconds of the shot is when he dropped him. But he was already watching him and pulling his gun out too, and the guy took his shot. But even so, even if you gave him 10 seconds or 20 seconds, it's still a good shot if you're planning on it and lining up and everything.
You may have any chance to see him, you pull a shotgun out of your purse or out of your jacket or whatever you got.
Yeah,
If you had a pistol, you might get by with it. Shotgun, the minute the butt comes up, you're gonna be seen.
Did it say what caliber, or was it a semi-automatic or a revolver?
that he had?
Yeah.
I think it was a 9mm. Might not have been, but it was a handgun. It was definitely a handgun that he used.
Yeah, but I have to search that, see if it was like a revolver or.
No, I think it was a semi-auto.
9mm would usually be a semi-automatic.
Yeah, because a revolver is more likely to be a 357 or a 38 or something, right? I would think. And if you're going to use it as a church security team, it's most likely going to be a semi-automatic.
Yeah.
Because most people, that's what they're using. But the revolvers are coming back in fashion.
I've never ever seen a 9mm revolver.
I don't think
I
I
don't
can
think so
either.
either. If it was 9, it was semi-automatic, although revolvers are actually more dependable because
Mhm.
semi-automatics jam.
Well, and also, if something happens with the revolver, you can tell a lot easier. It's a lot easier to tell that the barrel's clear. It's a lot easier to tell if there's a jam, where it's at, because it's a lot simpler mechanism. And if you have a double action, it's like a semi-automatic. Pull the trigger, it shoots. Pull the trigger, it shoots. So,
There's speed loaders that make it quick to reload.
yeah.
Yeah, you gotta be good at those speed loaders, though. They're a little tricky if you've never really used one.
Yeah.
Obviously, you need to
Just
practice these things.
Yeah.
But then again, you need to practice.
It shows Biden's wisdom about keeping all guns out of church.
It's irrational.
Right, well, you gotta remember, this is the same man deal like the second Joe Biden lunacy comment of the week. That all the coal miners should learn how to Code.
program, yeah, become code programmer. If you can throw coal in a furnace, you can code. That's what he said.
Wow.
If you can ride up and down the elevator in the coal mine shaft, you can learn to program. Yes, but remember, he's the same one that some years ago said that if there's somebody messing around your house, go out on your balcony with a double barrel shotgun and shoot both barrels and advertise that you're now empty. Just shoot both arrows up in the yard.
Oh. That's
I can't
stupid.
imagine why they think he's would make such a good president, because when Obama had him as vice president, they always put him in the back where he couldn't make a speech and tear something up.
Mm-hmm.
Pass it on.
Yes, creepy uncle.
Maybe the people that wanna handle him figure he'd be easy to handle.
That's,
Maybe he was in Obama's insurance policy.
well, that's what he said when he first became elected. He said that's the insurance policy. Nobody wants to mess with him because you don't want Joe Biden as president. But we told Lauren and Christopher one day, we were talking about something,
Yeah.
and we said, just Google the phrase creepy Uncle Joe. All you need to do, just Google creepy Uncle Joe, and you'll know everything you need to know about the guy.
No, I didn't need to know.
Yeah.
Well, you know one thing, if Trump gets voted out, you know who your vice president is gonna be?
Hmm.
That goofy gal that,
Mhm.
whatever, anyway.
AOC.
I've heard her
Yeah.
talking all the time, but she never knew what she's talking about.
Elizabeth, what's her name?
Not her.
Oh, not her?
Pelosi. Talking about Pelosi?
No, Pelosi would like to be there, but that one, I gotta take that spot.
AOC, the young girl?
Yeah, young girl, 20, 30 years old.
Mhm. Yeah, why not?
AOC.
Yeah, and he'll be behind her the whole time, stroking her hair
And sniffing it.
and sniffing it.
But she's already asked for, to be vice president. And she's working on it, because what's that guy's name? The goofy old man?
Biden.
Yeah.
Not Biden, this guy.
Bernie.
Oh, Bernie Sanders, yeah.
Bernie. But anyway, if he gets elected as being vice president, because she worked for him for 2 or 3 years before she ran for senator.
Did she run for
I don't
vice
think so.
president?
I don't think so,
You know-
because I don't think she's old enough.
Didn't,
Yeah, you have to be able to qualify for president in order to be vice
She's
president.
not old
Yeah.
enough.
didn't Bernie have like a minor heart attack on stage about a month ago?
Mhm.
And I saw where his doctor, I don't know who his doctor is, but said in the news, I think yesterday, that he's been checked out, he's in perfect health to be president of the United States.
Mhm. But you know, President Trump's on death's door and the doctors are just covering it up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think in order to be vice president, you have to be qualified to be president.
That's if
You wouldn't
you're
know
a
about it.
Republican.
That's if you're a Republican, right, Dave? Because she's already said that they should change the rules for her. So-
If Bernie likes communists, I guess he honeymooned in Russia.
Yeah.
Why didn't he just stay there? Why did they come back? Now it's like,
Man,
he
sure,
must love the
candidate.
system there.
Why did he run for president of Nicaragua or something? Venezuela? But,
Their ultimate goal is to usurp this country and this land and this wealth, and make it into the system.
but that is a big part of it because they train these people to get them back here, to take us over from within.
But the Dutch said socialism only works till the money runs out.
So then they have to get another country to go that way and steal their money.
No, that somebody said you can get into socialism with the ballots, but you need bullets to get out of it. So, which is why the governor of Virginia is now talking about putting together an 18-person unit that's going to go enforce his new gun laws. Because he's realizing law enforcement across the state's not going to do it. And he just floated the idea of having the National Guard round up guns that he declares illegal. And gun sales in Virginia are just skyrocketing right now.
One of the sheriffs there said if they try taking the guns, he would deputize anybody to fight it.
And the majority of the counties in Virginia have all declared themselves Second Amendment sanctuary counties, as well as a number of major cities
All right,
across Virginia. There's probably about 100 of them, counties and
we can have
cities.
sanctuary cities too.
Yeah,
How about that?
and
Talk about fast response. President taking care of, that guy over there in Iraq, that was a pretty good, quick response.
You know, he just found something else too.
yeah, Neil was just saying something about that.
I didn't hear what it was, all I did was, at the end.
North of Baghdad, at least 3 other people were taken out while they were driving, I guess.
But it makes sense to go after these senior people because they're the ones who are orchestrating all that. And that Soleimani, he was behind, helped with the Marine barracks way back in the late 70s. And all the IED program that's taken out so many of our young people and maimed countless others. It all goes back to him.
Well, they say he travels about all those countries with impunity.
Yeah.
Messes with them.
Well,
He's not going anywhere now.
somebody just messed with him. But I was talking on the radio today about Psalm 144:1, where it says, "Blessed be the Lord, my strength, which teacheth my hands to war and my fingers to fight, my goodness and my fortress, my high tower, and my deliverer, my shield, and he in whom I trust, who subdueth my people under me." And then over in Second Samuel chapter 23, talks about David and his mighty men. Because there's a lot of people in the pseudo-Christian community who are saying, "Oh, this is terrible that President Trump had this guy killed."
Is that 2 Samuel 3 or 23?
23, I think.
Okay, 23.
Yeah, verse 8. "These be the names of the mighty men whom David had." And these are men who are renowned for how many of the enemies of Israel they killed. With a spear, with a sword, with various means. And you look at, we started with that guy in the church in Texas. To make a shot like that, I think God guided his hand. Because under the best of conditions, that would have been a hard shot. And under that challenging situation, to be able to get that shot off like that as quickly as he did, and end everything, 6 seconds after the first shotgun blast. But when you read about some of these guys in 2 Samuel 23, where, they killed, like in verse 18, verse 8, you had the guy that killed 800 people at one time. That's kind of like when Samson killed the Philistines, remember?
Yeah.
With the jawbone of a donkey. And you think, how could somebody do that? Well, how could somebody do a 50-foot headshot in all that commotion? God's with them. That's what I think. And well, God wouldn't do that. Well, he's just recognizing these mighty men. And I was pointing out on the radio today, if you look at the very beginning of the chapter, in chapter 1, David's called the sweet psalmist of Israel. 2 Samuel chapter 23 and verse first one.
Oh, we're-
Yeah, he's called the sweet psalmist of Israel. And yet, you go on in the chapter to learn about the sweet psalmist of Israel and his military might and the mighty men that were, these are David's special ops here. This is a special ops scheme. You know, these guys went in, you know, anybody that can lift up a spear against 800. In verse 18, there's a guy that killed 300 right there. You know, you just read about these guys and the things that they did.
Well, they were definitely anointed by the Lord, though.
Mm-hmm.
You ain't-
Exactly.
You ain't taking out 300 guys.
No. Yeah, those are, so, you know, God used them and worked through them. And that's why I had tied in with Psalm 144, it's actually verses 1 and 2, where he's talking about God teaching his hands to war and his fingers to fight, but yet he refers to God as his strength, his goodness, his fortress, his high tower, and his deliverer, and his shield. But what did God do? Because it's all one sentence. God did all of those functions by teaching David's hands to war and his fingers to fight. And so he used David as a warrior in order to do those things, just like he did these mighty men. Use them and we may need people like that. You know, when you look at that shooting in Texas and you look at taking out that general in that Iranian general. What was it, Lauren or Christopher? Which one of you said the thing where you were saying something joking about? They said that we're upset because you, how'd you say it?
Oh, how,
Upset because you reacted to us
Oh,
attacking your embassy.
oh, it was, what was it? Oh, yeah. How dare you hit us back after attacking your embassy?
That's the way the liberals are. If you notice that, all the left, how dare you? Well, where were they when Obama was dropping drone strikes out of the sky? On,
Without congressional approval.
yeah, on American citizens, no less. And personally, I wasn't too worked up when they took out a couple of those American citizens because they had obviously allied themselves with the enemy and committed treasonous acts. But nevertheless, they were American citizens, and I can see the point. But this guy wasn't an American citizen. He was the leader of a military leader in a country that declared war in the United States, what, in 1979, and has never rescinded that. Even if we don't pretend that, you know, we pretend they're not at war with us, they've been at war with us ever since.
We do have a war on terror, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And he is definitely a terror orchestrator.
It's not like Trump really needs any additional, confirmation from Congress to
Yeah.
act.
And through this guy, you know, he's orchestrated. If you remove September 11, 2001 from the equation, this guy and the Iranians and Hezbollah are responsible for more American deaths than any other, Muslim group. So,
I think you should keep going until it, how long?
you can go for the mullahs. That's what they need to go for next.
What do they refer to one as Iran as what, the he-goat? Was it Daniel?
No, the he-goat was Greece
Okay.
and under Alexander the Great. The immediate Persians were the which one was it? One of them, I think it was let's see here. Was it a bear or something like that? In Daniel chapter 7, you have the beast that's like a bear, I believe. And that's, well, in that one, I think that was the Media-Persian. But there's a,
That in Russia?
not in that one, because the first one is like a lion with eagle's wings. And that was that was the Babylonians. Then the next one is the bear. And then the one after that is the leopard. And then the fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. So number 1 would be Babylon, number 2 would be Media-Persia, number 3 would be Greece, and number 4 would be Rome. Let's go back here to
What chapter was that you were reading?
that was chapter 7, I think. Yeah. Because that corresponds to the vision of the image that he had, remember, with the head of gold. And that's in chapter 2 or 3. 2, I think. Yeah, in Daniel chapter 2, starting in verse 36, he says, "This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory." Verse 30, this is Daniel chapter 2, verse 38, "And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold." So he's talking to Nebuchadnezzar here. So Babylon was the head of gold on this image. And then he says, "After thee there shall arise, or after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things. And as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be much shall be in it of the strength of the iron. For as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, and as the toes of the feet were part iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken." And it goes on to describe that, but the first kingdom obviously was Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. The second kingdom, the silver, was Media-Persia. And it's interesting because that's the arms and the chest. And Media-Persia was considered what? The Medes and the Persians. And of course, the Persians, that's Iran. The Medes, those were actually the modern day Kurds. So the Medes and the Kurds are the same group. And then after Media-Persia, the third kingdom of brass, that was the belly and all of brass. That was the Greeks under Alexander the Great came in and defeated the Media-Persian Empire. And then they were followed by the Iron Legs, which was Rome, which of course you had the eastern and western branches of the Roman Empire. And then of course Rome was broken up, and that's where we get the idea of the 10 kingdoms in the latter days, the 10 toes that are there. And then of course, at the end of that, God destroys that and the millennial kingdom comes in. So in Daniel chapter 7, you have again another dream, and you have 4 beasts here, and they come up from the sea in chapter 7, verse number 3 and 4. Beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. When you see a kingdom or a people or a group coming out of the sea, those are Gentile nations. If it's Jewish or something like that, they come out of the earth. And that's one of the ways of seeing what's happening in some of these things, generally speaking. And so you have the first one like a lion and had eagle's wings. And this one here is corresponding to Babylon, which of course was at the time. And then in verse 5, behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised itself up on one side and had 3 ribs of it in between teeth of it. And they said, thus did arise, devour much flesh. And basically the Medo-Persians defeated Babylon as well as the Lydian and Egyptian, powers. And that's what the 3 ribs are. They basically conquered Babylon and the Lydian and the Egyptians. But then number 6, after the Medo-Persian one, you have the one, I beheld the low and the other like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl, and the beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And of course, the Greeks, there's another one here with the goat that comes in that's represented, and where's that one at? Which is kind of interesting when you look at the one with the goat. Hold my finger there a minute. All right, where's one with the goat? I'm missing it. Find it here. Oh, there it is. Daniel chapter 8, yeah. I just was missing it completely. Yeah, when you look at Daniel chapter 8, he's in, Babylon, and he sees in verse number 3, I lifted up my eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. And of course, the lesser horn was Media, the higher horn was Persia, because in terms of the power and the authority that they had in the Medo-Persian Empire. So he's in Babylon, and the Medes and the Persians, they united together. They defeated the Babylonian power, and that would be that. The ram was pushing westward, northward, and southward because they came out of the east. So that's which way they pushed, west, north, and south, coming out of the east. And then, and you get down to verse 5, it says, and I was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And this is interesting because this corresponds to the leopard that we were just looking at, which had wings. You don't typically see a leopard with wings, but the leopard comes with wings. This goat comes so fast his feet doesn't touch the ground. He's got this notable horn between his eyes. When we see what happened with the Greeks, starting with Alexander the Great's father, Philip, I believe it was, of Macedonia, they began to unite the Greek city-states. And Alexander's one that brought it all together and fashioned into this great military power. And they just raced across. So they just conquered everything in sight. What was it? What did they call that? The Gordian knot, I think it was. It was on the side of the Bosphorus, I think it was. It was something to the effect of, whoever can untie this knot would be able to really just took his sword out and took care of that. But he went in and he died a young man with no successor, and his 4 top generals divided the kingdom. And that's what we see happen here. When he gets in there, he defeats the ram, and then he comes, and then the the horn basically splits into four, and that's where you also, with the one in Daniel, the leopard had four heads as well. And then followed by that, of course, is coming out of the Greek Empire, really, is the Romans. And you can see that happening in Daniel chapter 8, verse 8. Therefore, the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. So there's Alexander dies. And for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. So that's the four generals that took over four portions of his kingdom. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. If you read that thing there, by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, hold your finger there and go over to chapter 10, and then chapter 9, and in chapter 9, verse 27, where it says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. And that's where we're talking about this little horn that grows up. The Roman Empire, remember the Greek and Roman Empire, Greeks and Romans were very close. I mean, obviously Italy and Greece are separate countries, separate people. But when you look at the Greek and Roman culture, the gods that the Romans had were the same as the Greeks, just different names, but essentially the same. And the Romans basically sprung up on the western edge of the Greek Empire. And they quickly took over, and they took over all of the area that the Greek had. In fact, they called it the Greco-Roman Empire sometimes, people call it that. And there's some people teaching on Bible prophecy who just automatically lump the Greeks and the Romans together in every case. But the Roman Empire represents that last one, the two legs on the tower. Also the what was it in chapter? Where were we at? Chapter 7 there. It was the fourth beast in chapter 7, verse 7. And I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth, and it devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue at the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts which were before it, and had 10 horns. That would correspond to like the 10 toes. And then a little horn appears there, and they believe that would correspond to the little horn that appears on the goat in chapter 8. And that corresponds to the Antichrist, basically, who ends the sacrifice, the daily sacrifice. Well, the daily sacrifice, that's what's done in the temple, the daily sacrifice and oblations. And that's what the Antichrist does during the midpoint of the tribulation. He comes into the rebuilt temple and commands them to stop with the sacrifices and oblations. And he claims to be God, and now demands that everything is sacrificed to him. So we go through these diverse visions, but they all kind of tie together. There's a lot of things that help tie them together. The iron feet, the iron teeth, the little horn, and different things that kind of link them together. But one of the things that people have looked at in the past is they made some looking at these things and said that elements of these will be in the last kingdom. Elements of all of them. And they've made instances, for instance, the beast, the lion. Well, the British Empire, the lion became their representative animal. And how did the lion speak? The English language. What language is becoming the world language today? English. And then, of course, Russia with the bear, communism, and people have speculated about that. Because when you go back to the book of Revelation, you have, let's see here. I'm going toward the end of Revelation. Let me see where I want to go. All right, Revelation chapter 13. Revelation chapter 13, starting in verse number 1. He says, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name blasphemy." And it's interesting because this is the rise of the Antichrist. And of course, he comes up out of the sea, which means out of the Gentile nations. And he's got the 10 crowns, the 10 horns, which corresponds to the 10 horns that are mentioned elsewhere in Daniel, and the 10 toes and all of that. Presumably a 10 kingdoms of the world, that the world was kind of divided into 10 governing regions, 10 kingdoms. And there's a variety of different groups that have put forward their ideas of a one world government. And it's kind of interesting that a number of these groups, which have nothing to do with the Bible, they divide the world into 10 administrative regions. You know, different groups dividing the world into 10 regions. Why would they pick 10? And yet you have in the Bible, in the latter days, these 10 kingdoms. And but when you read about this beast in Revelation 13, verse 2, "And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard." Well, we saw the leopard, remember the Greek? His feet were as the feet of a bear. Well, that was the Media Persians. And his mouth, the mouth of a lion. Well, that was the Babylonians. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. And of course, the dragon there is referring to back to the previous chapter, the devil himself. And so it's interesting, this last kingdom on this basis is fought to unite all of the power and strength of the previous kingdoms. And but again, other people have said, well, the mouth of a lion, you know, British spoke English, the feet of the bear, communism, run from the Soviet Union days all around the world. I forget where the leopard came in right up top of my head right now, but this is where we see the deadly head wound and all this. And as you see this beast here, you come a little further down into verse number 11. And this is one of the things that makes it a little curious here in Revelation 13. Good evening. In Revelation 13, okay, we started with verse 1. This first beast comes up out of the sea, which generally speaking indicates coming out of the Gentile nations. But notice the second beast, verse 11, I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, which is generally considered to mean coming up out of the Jewish people. And there was a lot of speculation the last 2 times that they elected a new pope, because they had one cardinal who was of Jewish background. Ethnically, he was Jewish. He had become Catholic somewhere along the line and become a cardinal. And the speculation was, as a pope, he would have come up out of the earth, so to speak, if the pope was to be not the Antichrist, but the false prophet. He would have been a perfect fit in that sense. You have to see how that would work, because he's heading a worldwide, a worldwide religious system. Good evening. But yet he's coming up out of the earth, with Jewish background. Other speculation here, but it says that they beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and caused the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. And this is the guy that puts together the worship of the Antichrist as God, and the image, and the people have to bow down and worship the image. And he has the ability to do miracles. Verse 13, he doth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And it's kind of interesting, the tie-in, when you compare these things with Daniel. What was it that Nebuchadnezzar did after the first dream, where he had the dream of the image? He had to make a great golden image. Not, instead of just a head of gold, he made the whole thing golden. And then they had the thing, remember, with the music playing? And when the music stopped, everybody had to bow down and worship. And he said, remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would not. And so this is kind of interesting. Again, here's a beast, and if you don't worship it, you're killed. And he causeth all, verse 60, he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. And here is wisdom, let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of man, and his number is 666. So 3 score, score is 20, so 3 times 20 would be 60, so 666.
This beast then is the false prophet.
Yeah. The first beast that comes up out of the sea is the Antichrist. The second beast coming up out of the earth is the false prophet.
See, that's interesting. I never picked up on that. That it's this particular beast that's doing the 666.
Yeah, because
That's
he's
his mark.
trying to get everybody to worship the first beast. And I believe this corresponds to in 2 Thessalonians, where, because remember we already saw in Daniel chapter 9, where he causes the sacrifices and oblations to cease, which is what the one horn did also. But in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, it says in verse number 3, and let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God.
Is that also then the false prophet?
That's the Antichrist.
Okay, but
So he's going to declare himself to be God, basically, and the false prophet will tell everybody, yes, he's God, you gotta worship him under penalty of death. Essentially.
I guess going back to the Revelation, staying there for a second, 13.
Yeah.
When he's talking about that mark and that name, it says the number of the beast.
Mm-hmm.
So that number is of the man, the false, because there's so many people that are trying to count that number toward the Antichrist. But am I reading this toward?
No, the number is the number of the Antichrist. It's based on the number of man. Number of man is 6. The number of God is 7. Man was created on the 6th day, and 7 is the perfect number.
I understand that, but reading down through this whole section you just read,
Mm-hmm.
every time it mentions, like in 16, and he, is that he there That's still,
Yeah.
that's still the false prophet.
Okay, yeah, and the false prophet causes all those small and great, rich and poor, free and bond to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. And that, yeah, no man might buy or sell save he had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name.
So then there where it said the name of the beast, he's referring back to the first beast, which is.
Yeah, the false prophet. I'm sorry, the Antichrist. Because the beast or the name of the beast is the Antichrist.
Because they're both called beasts.
Yeah, they're both creatures or
The
beasts,
ones
yeah.
from the sea.
But
So it's-
if you look at it, if you go back up a little bit further here in verse 14, it's identified for us because he says, he deceiveth them that dwell on the earth. This is the false prophet. The false prophet deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of the miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, in the sight of the Antichrist,
Okay,
saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the Antichrist, which had the wound by the sword and did live. And so if you go back up here to chapter 1 or 13, verse 2, and the beast which I saw, this is the first beast, this is the Antichrist, was like unto a leopard. You see in verse 3, and I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast, and they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him? This is all talking about the Antichrist. Then we come in verse number 11, the second beast, which is the false prophet, and he makes an image of the first beast, the one that was wounded. And he causes everybody to worship the first beast. And see, when you look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, you see the son of perdition sitting in the temple declaring himself to be God. So this would be about the midpoint of the tribulation. And this is probably about the time, it may well be that when the two witnesses who are in Jerusalem at this time are killed, that what happened is in the process of that, the first beast is wounded, but survives. And there's some speculation too. Some people say, well, the heads are kingdoms. It may mean that one of his notable kingdoms is destroyed, but he survives. And not even a physical head wound to an individual, but actually a kingdom.
is that because of verse 3? One of his heads?
Yeah, one of his heads. And yeah, and it was a deadly wound that was healed. So something happens there. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that they start out based in Rome, and there's a nuclear attack in Rome, and it's up in smoke, and it looks like that's it. He's finished, but then he survives it in Jerusalem. You know, that's just pure speculation. So that's one thought, but I think a lot of people believe that it actually means that the Antichrist himself will suffer a severe head wound that should be mortally wounded. But I would allow for it being a kingdom as well.
So it could be literal or figurative.
Yeah, or both. It could be both.
Right.
But we have let's see here, back in chapter 11 is where we have the two witnesses, and they're killed at the midpoint of the tribulation. And it starts, well, starting in verse number 3, it says, and I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth. And that gives us the first half of the tribulation. So
1,260 days, by the way.
yeah, and that's 3.5 years when you look at a 360 day year. And the 7 years are based, I believe, on 360 days. And I think that goes back to, if I remember reading it, prior to the flood, you know, the time of Noah, They looked at a year as being 360 days. And it may well have been because there was a number of things that happened to the earth during the things that caused the flood to happen. There's some belief that the events that resulted in the flood might have caused the earth to lose, what was it, 10% of its mass, which would account for a lot of the comets and different things that we see. And at the same time, it would have drastically affected the Earth's axis. It may have been more or less, straight up and down. Now it's at an angle. And also it may have affected, it would have affected the time that it takes the Earth to spin on its axis, because we know that when a major earthquake occurs,
Yeah,
it slows
that big one
the
that
Earth.
hit in Japan.
Yeah, slowed the
years
Earth by
ago.
about a second or something like that, I think it was. So a massive earthquake that would have caused the fountains of the deep to open up worldwide could have taken days off from and the loss of all that mass could have taken added, 4.25 days to our year, basically, or however, anyway, the way the Earth spins so that we perceive as we go around. We just had, New Year's, another trip around the sun, 365.25 days. But that, we perceive days based on how fast the Earth spins. If the Earth spun twice as fast, it would have been twice as many days. If it spun half as fast, it would have been half as many days. And is how we would have reported it. So the prophetic years, they believe, are based on what you had in the original year, which is probably 360 days, which is interesting because how many degrees are there in a circle? 360. And there's a reason for that. They believe the reason for that is it's based on what it was. Every day was 1 degree around the sun. And, some of these things we'll find out, of course, when we get to heaven, but regardless of that, we have the two witnesses working in the first half of the tribulation. And it says in verse 7, and when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them. And this is a reference to the Antichrist coming against them, but the Antichrist has not been in the bottomless pit. Some people speculate, Judas that betrayed Christ was referred to as a son of perdition. And so the Antichrist will actually be Judas brought back from the dead. I guess you could make a case for that, but I'm not sold on that. The Antichrist is inhabited by Satan himself, just like Judas was. And Judas became a son of perdition as a result. And it could be that that's what happens with the Antichrist. And we know from Revelation 19 that, chapter 20 rather, that the devil will be in the bottomless pit and come back out of it. So he is the beast that will eventually one day come up out of the bottomless pit. So I think it's reasonable to believe that this is the Antichrist. In whatever his origin is, he's going to overcome them and kill them. And it says in verse 8, and their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So that's how we know it's Jerusalem. And, maybe somewhere leading up to this or involved in this or whatever, the Antichrist receives that wound or something, but he overcomes the two witnesses. And the two witnesses are formidable individuals because it says in verse 5, if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth and devoureth their enemies. Well, that's, pretty impressive. Fire breathing.
Typical.
Yeah, it's a little more than eating those fiery Dorito things, right? Yeah, it's like, and fire comes out like a flamethrower and it's basically boom, that's it.
Question?
Yeah.
Going back to the witnesses, their dead bodies laying in the street
Mm-hmm.
of the great city called Sodom and Egypt. that kind of throws me, because I was thinking Jerusalem too, but why does
Yeah,
it call it Sodom and Egypt?
Figuratively, because of the sin and everything, because it's told that it's Jerusalem because it said where also our Lord was crucified.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Sodom
so that
and
throws it right
Jerusalem,
there.
yeah, Sodom and Egypt are descriptive. Sodom was wicked and
Yeah,
immoral,
Sodom and Gomorrah.
and Egypt was a picture of the world, very worldly, very
Okay.
secular.
Okay.
And it is kind of interesting because right now, you know, I had somebody actually try to tell me on the radio one time that the current state of Israel can't possibly be the prophesied Jewish nation of the Bible because they're too secular, Egypt, and they tolerate homosexuality there openly, and they don't tolerate it in the Arab states or the Muslim states around them, Sodom. So it's like Sodom and Egypt in that sense, secular and tolerant of immorality. So, but if this is sort of becoming the center of the world's culture too, you can see where that would come in. Because there's elsewhere descriptions of the Antichrist that imply that he very well may be a homosexual man. Of course, today it could be a transgender homosexual lesbian in a homosexual man's body or something. Who knows? Whatever, they come up with these crazy things.
A unicorn.
That unicorn.
Hey, I had another question. Going to chapter 13, verse 2 in Revelations, it talks, and the beast I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear. Now, is that the beginning of like would that represent the Antichrist?
Right,
Okay, because what I wanted to continue on is in the second half, and got my attention when you said earlier, the dragon gave up his power. So you said the dragon is like the devil?
Yeah, because look in the previous chapter where it says in verse 7, there was war in heaven. Michael and his angel fought with the dragon, or against the dragon.
Okay.
And the dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels are cast out with him. And this would be the midpoint of the tribulation. And so we're referring to him in verse 13 then, where it says, and when the dragon saw that he was cast out into the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. Of course, that's the Jewish people. And he's called the serpent again in verse 15. Verse 16, he's called the dragon again. Verse 17, he's called the dragon again. And so now we come into chapter 13. Chapter headings and verse numbers are artificial. So we're coming right from that, talking about who the dragon is repeatedly as the devil, into chapter 13 and the Antichrist, or this first beast. He's gets his power from the dragon. And in verse 4 it says, and they worship the dragon which gave power unto the beast.
And in verse 2, the dragon gives up a lot. He gave him his power.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like Satan giving the Antichrist his power and his seat and
His
great
great
authority.
yeah, so he's empowered. Yeah, the devil is.
It's almost like he's definitely the devil in the flesh.
Yeah, the devil
Antichrist.
indwells him, just like
Yeah.
the devil indwelt Judas Iscariot.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Because
wow.
at the Last Supper, remember, the devil actually entered into Judas.
Wow.
And so, you know, people have been what we call demon possessed.
Okay.
And there's cases of it in the Bible. But there's very few cases in the Bible of people who are actually possessed by Satan himself.
Yeah.
Because there's all of these lesser devils
Yeah.
that do a lot of this stuff. And it still happens today. But Satan is going to take possession of certain individuals at key times. There's people who believe that Hitler was actually possessed by Satan himself. That may well have been the case. In you know, there's various speculations. But yeah, this guy here in Judas Iscariot clearly are possessed by Satan himself, indwelt by Satan. Satan actually takes possession of them and works through them. and yeah, and gives him his power. And in effect, what we have is an unholy Trinity. You know, we have the Holy Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Here we have an unholy Trinity, the dragon, the Antichrist, and the false prophet. And they all work hand in hand. And the false prophet does everything he can to get people to worship the Antichrist as God. And of course, the Antichrist is possessed by Satan himself. And, you know, that fulfills Satan's desire to be worshiped as God. You know, to usurp
That's where
God's
the
place.
Christians get beheaded if they don't
Right,
worship,
right.
right?
Yeah.
Which, probably not be a whole lot of Christians, but they'll be out
Well,
there too.
There will be people who come to Christ during the tribulation, because the Bible talks about multitudes of people from every nation, every tongue, every kindred. Because once these events start taking place, you know, we have some things that will happen during the tribulation that we don't have now. One, we have the two witnesses. And if somebody picks up a Bible and starts reading it, and they read, what is going on over in Jerusalem? What are these two guys? Hey, that's just like what we read here. We must be in the tribulation.
Fire coming out of their mouth,
Yeah.
destroying all who come against them.
So, and also when the rapture takes place, I really believe that, let's just say the rapture took place this year. I really believe that there are people that we talk with who are kind of like, well, you know, it's nice for you, but that just, you know, disappearing, caught up in the clouds, you know, that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That's not too logical. You know, they're skeptical. They're not just saying, you know, I don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
There are people who are saying, no, that just got me. When the rapture takes place, I think a great many of them may realize, hey, they were right. And so that's where some people will come to Christ.
Not so crazy after.
Yeah, plus there's the 144,000 witnesses, 12,000 young Jewish men out of each of the 12 tribes of Israel that are specially sealed and commissioned and sent out into the world. And, you know, there's a movement apparently amongst Orthodox Jews who are coming to the conclusion, though they don't want to be open about it, that Jesus is the Messiah. You had that Rabbi Keturah, who was the most notable rabbi in Israel in modern times, who before he died said he had concluded through his study who the Messiah was, and he put his name in a safety deposit box to be opened what was like a year and a half after his death. And when they opened it, it said the Messiah was Jesus of Nazareth. And they said, oh, it must be a hoax. Oh, he must have been senile in his last days. And they promptly covered it up. There was a book written on it. I had a guy on the radio several years back who wrote a book about Rabbi Keturah. And, you know, this guy was well known enough that world leaders came to his funeral, not just a few family and friends, but all of the heads of state in Israel, past heads of state, and military leaders, and European leaders. I think there were even some former presidents that were there. I mean, this guy was very influential.
Roughly what year did he die, you know?
I would say it was after, well, let me look it up. Look up Keturah here. Why not look it up rather than guess?
I'm gonna read about him tonight, and I was just
Yeah.
try to get what information I can out.
Let's see. Well, maybe it's not. I'm looking at Keturah here. I'm not finding anything. So pardon me, Katari. something here. I'm trying to think of the guy that did the book. Let me try this. Let's see if we can get here. Kaduri. Okay, I was saying Couture. It's Yitzhak Kaduri. Yitzhak Yitzhak Kaduri. Kaduri. And there's a book called it's by Carl Gallups, The Rabbi Who Found Messiah. Here it is. It's the story of Yitzhak Kaduri and his prophecies of the end time. And when did he? Well, let's see. There's a thing in Breaking Israel News in 2015 where it talks about his claim discredited as false. 2006.
Thank you.
That's when he died.
Yeah, he was a little over 100 years old when he died in 2006.
Wow.
And of course, there's these Jewish groups that are trying to say, "Oh no, this never happened. Never happened." So they, basically tried to cover that up. But Carl Gallups, he's the guy that wrote the book, the Rabbi Who Found Messiah, the story of Yitzhak Kaduri and his prophecies of the end time. And let's see. Trying to see if I can see anything more on there. But anyway, there's thought that Jesus could be the Messiah, according to some people, amongst some of the Orthodox, ultra Orthodox in Jerusalem or in Israel in particular. And if that's the case, it could be that God is preparing the hearts for a number of the Jewish people to receive him. And that could explain the 144,000 in the first part of the tribulation. And then, of course, in addition to them, there's a vast multitude out of every tongue and nation.
Those the rebuilding of the temple and all that goes with it require all those people to then make that change, that acceptance.
The rebuilding of the temple wouldn't need the 144,000. I mean, they're ready to do that right now. It just needs a change in the political climate, and they can rebuild the temple in very short order. They have pretty much all the materials together. And then they'll reinstitute animal sacrifices in the temple because the Antichrist comes in and causes the sacrifice and daily oblations to cease. So they have to be started because they're not going right now. So when the temple is built, it'll be built for the Jewish form of worship under the law. And then Romans chapter 11 says essentially that the whole nation will come to know Christ as their Messiah. And when we were looking at going through the book of Zechariah, it appears from Zechariah chapter 12 through 14 that it'll be toward the end of the tribulation that the entire remnant of the Jewish people embrace him as their Messiah, because they look upon whom they have pierced and they mourn because they realize the one we rejected was the Messiah. And
the rebuilding of the temple, will the rapture be before that, do you think?
could be before, during, or after. There's really nothing that needs to be fulfilled for the rapture to take place. the tribulation starts not when the believers are caught out of the world. It starts when the Antichrist recognizes the treaty or covenant with Israel. That's from Daniel chapter 9. When he does that, that's when the 7-year tribulation, and it's the 70th week of Daniel's 70 weeks of years vision in Daniel chapter 9, because we're in a big parenthesis between week number 69 and week number 70. Week 69 ended with the cutting off of Messiah, and now we're waiting when the Antichrist comes on the scene and confirms the covenant. Then week 7 takes place, and that's the 7 years of the tribulation period. So the temple could be rebuilt during the first half, could be rebuilt beforehand. There's any number of things. I kind of think it would not likely to be rebuilt until about the time, somewhere around the time when God catches the believers out of the world, because there's we've looked at it. Remember in the past, Psalm 83 is a battle that takes place that results in Syria and Lebanon and what would be Iraq today and Jordan today and Egypt basically being decimated, which also explains why they're not in the invasion in Ezekiel 38, because they're just not mentioned there. But they're decimated in a prior battle. And it could be that the prior battle sets the stage. This is what we've speculated in the past. The prior battle sets the stage for the arrival of the Antichrist, because the prior battle results in such things as Damascus being destroyed overnight, which we've suggested the most likely way for that to happen is a nuclear attack, and also an indication that the Aswan Dam would be destroyed, and if that was destroyed with say several nuclear missiles burrowing in about 100 feet into the dam and blowing up. And
that dam is over in Turkey that cuts off?
No, in Egypt.
Oh,
And it would cause the Lake Nasser to flood the entire Nile Valley, and see all of that clay that the dam, because it's an earthen dam, that clay would absorb a lot of the nuclear fallout. So you got radioactive mud churning down the valley.
Couldn't a lot of these battles in there, they can happen even during the tribulation?
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying, just speculating, for an order, because it looks like if I were to, I'm just saying, this is pure speculation. I'm not saying this is how it's going to play out. I think this first battle that's identified in Psalm 83 will take place. I think in that battle, that's where this ring around Israel is essentially destroyed, and much of it rendered uninhabitable. And it looks like a nuclear exchange. And Israel is almost destroyed, but they survived. And then if that took place, and let's say the United States at the same time, something happened, because something's got to take us out. Something's got to take place. And, we got all this stuff going on with Iran right now. The Iranians, along with the North Koreans, Chinese, and Russians, have all done dry runs and research into how best to attack us with an electromagnetic pulse attack. They can, all they have to do is bring a freighter into the Gulf of Mexico, sitting 100 miles off the coast, open up a freighter, raise up a missile launcher, shoot a nuclear missile over the heartland of the United States, about 100 miles up, maximize the electromagnetic pulse attack, basically putting us into the dark ages. And so what happens to us? We're sidelined now. And for whatever reason, so many people in our government don't want to do anything about it. The Trump administration has been doing some things, and the military has done some things, but so much of our infrastructure would be devastated. And they estimate that potentially 90% of the United States population would die within a year. So that's how devastating it would be. And if that took place and we're in chaos here, then that means the power is going to shift back to Europe, right? And So if a war in the Middle East took place at the same time, and Israel's nearly devastated, and they realize their only recourse is nuclear, and they strike out, and they devastate the area around them in a regional nuclear war, and the world shell shocked, can you see that as being a perfect opportunity for an antichrist, for a world leader to rise, promising peace if you'll just lay down your weapons? Because remember Ezekiel 38, Israel is described as a land of unwalled villages, which it isn't today. I mean, they're very much armed and walled and everything else. And the Antichrist says, we'll guarantee your peace. And they would agree to do that because the enemies around them are destroyed. So if that were the case, that would be a perfect opportunity for the Antichrist to come on as the white horse in Revelation chapter, 5, I think it is, who comes what? Promising peace. But it's followed quickly by war. And it could be on the heels of that the Russians say, you know what? This is the perfect opportunity to get what we've always wanted and to lead a coalition into Israel. And the world is still weak and reeling. And that would explain why the other group sort of sits back and says, hey, you shouldn't be doing that, but don't appear to do much. So that could set the stage for the Ezekiel 38 battle, which could be the red horse of war in the four horsemen. Remember the four horsemen, first one, peace, and the white horse, the Antichrist, and then you've got the horse of war, and then followed by, famine and pestilence and
We got the
all
white
that.
horse,
The red horse,
the red horse, the black horse. and the
Yeah, which
pale
is
horse.
death. the pale horse and disease and all, famine and all that. Yeah, that's all in Revelation chapter, chapter 6, chapter 6, yeah. So if the white horse was a revelation of the Antichrist, and again, that's speculation, I'm not saying that it is, but this would be the beginning of the tribulation as the seals are starting to be opened. And then the next horse, the red horse, that's war. The black horse, of course, with that has the famine and everything. And then the pale horse, that's where death comes in, which you could see where that would be the case. So you could have the Psalm 83 battle, followed by the rise of the Antichrist, and then immediately after that, the red horse, the white horse, Antichrist, red horse being the Ezekiel 38 battle, followed by the results of that, famine and death, which then, of course, the attention has shifted away from the United States over to Europe and over to the Middle East. And that's where all the attention is. And if during the course of that, let's say, remember we were speculating that the head of the Antichrist that's struck and mortally wounded could have been one of his kingdoms. Let's say that the Russians or somebody decide to nuke Rome, if the world government, or Belgium, wherever the government is. And so now they move to the Middle East. There's all kinds of speculation that you can make.
Is there scripture kind of backs up that even the United States might turn on Israel too?
I don't agree. I don't think that, because the passage in Revelation, in Ezekiel 38, when you look at it,
I thought there was something in there about basically the whole world turns against.
there's a passage about everybody's troubled with Israel. I'll come to that one again. Hold that one there. But in Ezekiel 38, when Gog and Magog and their group comes against them, the ones who object is in Ezekiel 38, verse 13, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof shall say unto thee, meaning to God and Magog, art thou come to take spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take prey, to carry away silver and gold, take away cattle and goods, and to take great spoil? It doesn't say that they do much, but it does say that they object. So there's a group that's objecting. But if you go over to Let's see if it's Obadiah. Let me see. There might be. No, not Obadiah. Look up here a second. I'm not finding exactly what I'm looking for, but there is one passage in I was looking in Isaiah, a couple passages. Isaiah 8:14 says, "Ye shall be for a sanctuary, but for a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both houses of Israel." But that's it. There is a passage along the lines of what you're talking about the people being offended and are trying to find it here. Sometimes when you're thinking of a particular passage, you get the wrong word in your head and it doesn't want to come up. Okay, Zechariah 12:3. Let's take a look at that. Zechariah 12:3 says, "And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it." Is that kind of what you're looking at?
Yeah, I think that's, I heard somebody preach on that maybe a few years back, and it kind of stuck in my mind. That's why I kind of brought it up, wondering if
Yeah.
that might be us in there.
Well, and burdensome stone and being cut, means that everybody that deals with it's going to have something happen to them. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're against it, because just doesn't matter what we do. It's a burdensome stone. There's nothing that you can do that's going to make everybody happy, for one thing. Somebody's going to be upset, and the people of the earth gather together against it. And we have pretty much seen that. I mean, you got a nation that's about the size of New Jersey that has had, UN resolution after UN resolution made against it. People all over the world are burdened with it and wind up being cut in pieces, so to speak. So,
Going back to Ezekiel 38, where you had a
Mhm.
second about this, who is God interpreted as in that 14 through the end of the chapter? And that gets even into 39.
yeah, well, it starts in chapter 2, or in verse 2. God in the land of Magog and chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. And that's in the north. Meshech is the same route from which we get Moscow and Tubalitz, and there's several place names and a river name in Russia and in Kazakhstan, I think, and I want to say Azerbaijan, where that name is typically found. But or the land of Gog and the land of Magog. That's God is Rosh, and which gives us Russia. And there's people who have linguistically traced these words, and it corresponds with where these people migrated to. So the land of Magog and Gog and Meshech and Tubal is going to be basically Central Asia. So you look north of Jerusalem on the map, what's the most notable city that you find? It's Moscow. And
Oh, yeah, first 15 out of the north part.
mhm. Yeah, and so a number of things take place there because they come against Israel, and like I said, it's a land of unwalled villages, which is dwelling at rest and peace and safety. That's not Israel today. So in order for the Ezekiel 38 battle to take place, major changes have to occur. And I don't buy what some people have taught that well, they just didn't mention Egypt, they just didn't mention Syria, they just didn't mention what would make up Jordan, which was that Moab and Ammon, I think it was. They just didn't mention them because they couldn't mention everybody.
Oh, I see, because he has the list in verse 5.
Yeah, there's a big list. And then there's a second list of those that oppose them, verse 13. Sheba and Dedan, that would essentially be Saudi Arabia and some of the Gulf states, because those were the descendants of Abraham through Keturah, and as opposed to the Sheba and Dedan that were descendants of Ham. And also the merchants of Tarshish. Tarshish was the outpost on the Atlantic side of Spain, near where the naval base Rota, Spain is at, and that was the stopping point for the ships that the Hiram and Solomon. They had their ships. They would go there, and then they would head from there up into the British Isles, where they would mine tin and different things. And also, there's evidence that they actually went west across the Atlantic and into the Americas. So the merchants of Tarshish and all the young lions thereof would be the offspring of the merchants of Tarshish. So the merchants of Tarshish represented Spain, France, and Britain. The offspring of Spain, France, and Britain. That's where we would come in that one. But then as you go further down in Ezekiel chapter 38, God intervenes and destroys the people there. Some people think that this will actually take place before the tribulation. Some people think the tribulation might take place during this. There's a book out there that says the Psalm 83 battle takes place and Israel's so victorious it becomes a world superpower and everybody's afraid to touch them. And that's why they're dwelling in a land of unwalled villages at peace. But that doesn't comport with the scripture that talks about when Damascus is destroyed, the military might goes out from Ephraim, and Israel's like the olive branch after it's been harvested, nothing left to it, and weak. So
Israel waxes lean.
yes, waxes lean. Doesn't sound like it becomes a great superpower. And then when you get into chapter 39 and it talks about it some more, I've actually heard some people preach that when you get in chapter 39 and you get down past verse 16, you're getting into the Battle of Armageddon. And you do have some blurring of lines between things in the Old Testament. When they look forward, it's like there's no depth perception. And you'll see that oftentimes in Bible prophecy. It just kind of goes forward. And, so like the prophecies of the Messiah, one of the reasons the Jewish people have such trouble is the prophecy of the suffering Messiah and the ruling Messiah, with no depth perception. They think that he had to come and then, Jesus didn't stay, so he can't be the Messiah. He's not ruling. So the ruling and the suffering Messiah are separated, same person separated by some 2,000 years now, or nearly 2,000 years. So, so if you have that as a scenario and the rapture, say, took place around about the time of the Psalm 83 battle, that would be a good time where we could be attacked, and that would be good reason that Israel says we're on our own and we need to retaliate and pull out all the stops, because they've got what they call the Samson complex. They're not going to go down without a fight. They'll take their enemies down with them. They're not going to do what they did at Masada and just kill themselves and leave the enemies alone. They have the means right now to take out all their enemies around them. And they've got nuclear capable submarines, with missiles that can be sitting out in the Indian Ocean or out in the Mediterranean and launch missiles, in addition to the ones that they have, land-based and air-based. They can drop them from airplanes, and I'm sure their Navy ships have them. And I'm sure they don't advertise like the U.S. Navy doesn't advertise. I'm sure they don't advertise which ships have what. And they have means of getting things in as well. But yeah, it's interesting. Everybody knew that they had a nuclear program, but nothing was, confirmed. And in the 1980s, while I was stationed in England, a guy who had inside knowledge went to the Times of London, and they had a big article splashed across the Sunday Times about, complete with pictures of Israel's nuclear infrastructure. And the guy disappeared. He just vanished from England.
Oh.
He just vanished, and people couldn't find him. And a few weeks later, he turned up on trial in Jerusalem. Amazing. It's amazing. It's just like he was teleported.
Now, did you say earlier, though, that the Jews have nuclear submarines?
They have submarines with nuclear weapons on them.
Okay.
That's what I meant to say.
I don't think they have one nuclear sub, though, but they.
No, not nuclear powered, but they have
nuclear
a weapon.
capabilities.
Yeah, they have machine
Okay.
or missile boats. Missile boats.
Okay.
So why is it in the Navy submarines are called boats?
Anything under 300 feet is a boat.
And I had explained to me if it can be carried on a ship, it's a boat.
Carried on a ship, it's a boat.
But everything underwater, including the big boomers, are boats.
Well, LSD it would be 20 feet shorter, it'd be a boat.
Well, how big is
Navy
a
regulation.
Ohio class nuclear powered submarine?
They're about 600 feet, I believe.
Yeah, I was gonna say they're only 300 feet long.
I'll give you a new definition my son, who's in the Navy, gave me. Take a speedboat going fast on the water. When it goes into a turn, it leans this way. But an aircraft carrier, it doesn't lean into a turn, so it's not a boat. Or big ships, they usually don't lean into a turn where a boat does, like a little boat will go like that. A big ship ain't leaning into the turn, it leans the opposite way. If you think about it.
Destroyers, lean, escorts.
They lean into?
Yeah, they lean.
Really?
The Ohio class is 560 feet long.
I mean, it's.
What's that?
No.
The
Yeah.
Ohio class submarine is 560 feet long.
This guy says anything on 400.
According to Bruce,
Well, yeah, that's what
we got
that's.
it named, but the pilots on the
You didn't board a ship.
on the submarine, I was in it.
No, they got these-
It only displaces 16,000 tons.
Methane. If they have a nose.
Take it right in, yeah.
Yeah, only 16,000 tons.
We used to call cars boats.
Yeah.
And Volkswagen floats. Most of the time.
Well, actually, I was concerned with the riding car.
Yeah.
A heavy vehicle.
In Samoa, you would have a boat was a ba'a and an airplane was a ba'a lele, which was a boat with wings, because the first planes that came down there were the ones that would land on the water. So,
Oh, okay.
See, it's all choked up over that topic. Here's one thing said here. Early submarines were carried by ships and tended by submarine tenders. So before they became larger, they just took on the name boat. So what you were saying, and being carried, they just kept the designation despite the fact that they became much, much bigger. They still just
Well, I'm
called
sure
boats.
it's bigger, but the only thing different on this nuclear sub, they use that nuclear fuel for their boilers, boil the water.
Mhm. But so it comes from the history. Originally, all submarines were carried on ships because they were submersibles. They originally were deployed off from ships, and then the submarine tenders, could carry the submarine, and then,
Well, they were in the Civil War.
yeah, and so that designation stuck. So even though now the bigger submarines can't be carried by a ship,
That submarine probably 30 foot long.
a little different now. A little different now.
Yeah, two guys in a crane.
Yeah. Well, and then the Germans had, what was it, the mini sub that they came up with, basically like a 2 or 3 man submarine
Japs had them too.
They
Japs
have
had them. They landed on the west coast.
with a mini sub.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the Japs landed that 2-man job in Hawaii.
I think the Japs had their little airplane on one of their subs at that bomb, Oregon, during World War II.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think I heard something like that.
Yeah, you could look that up.
They had it strapped to the top of the thing, and then they got in close enough, and they had like a
Launched
flat
it
top
somehow.
on it, launched it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They dropped one little bomb in the middle of nowhere. And it was in Oregon somewhere. Well, they didn't want to cut me short because they said behind every blade of grass, the Americans had a gun.
American with a gun, yeah. Well, that kept the Soviets at bay during the Cold War, too.
Certainly she.
These people that come to the Lord during after the rapture, including 144,000,
Leaning
and I
against
assume
throwing it down.
backsliders that once did the Lord and came back, repented. They're not part of the church, are they?
Well, you have everybody at the time of the rapture that takes place, when the rapture takes place, everybody who's genuinely born again is going to be caught up out of the world. Now, you're going to have a lot of people when the rapture takes place who claim to be Christians who aren't. It's somebody has observed in the past that the 2 biggest surprises of heaven is going to be seeing people there that you never expected to see there, and not seeing people that you expected to be there.
There'd be a lot of people at church on that Sunday morning.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot of churches that when the rapture takes place, you never know anything happened.
Well, they'll say it couldn't have happened, we're still here.
Yeah, we're still
and
here.
the Pope is still.
Yeah, and so how could it have been? And because if you read some stuff, had it not been for this thing in Texas and the attack on that Iranian general, I was going to talk about this one thing that I read where this guy who considers himself a mainstream Christian is talking about people like us and about how we're naive and backward and we believe in fairy tales and all this kind of nonsense. And And we're afraid of anybody that looks different than we are, and that's why we support Trump. And it's just a bunch of nonsense. But there's a lot of people out there that are trying to cast themselves now as evangelicals who, let me see if I can.
That guy that calls himself an elite Christian.
Yeah, he's like that. The guy that wrote that essay or that opinion piece for the Christianity Today, and yeah, this. Let me scroll down here. I should be able to see it as soon as it comes up. Oh. Let's see. Waiting for it to load. Yes, this guy here by the name of John Pavlovitz. He's a pastor out of North Carolina area, writer, activist, and he proclaims himself a member of the vast, disparate, compassionate, humane middle. And this is what he writes about people like us. And this is becoming a mainstream view amongst even like Southern Baptists have this group that presents itself as conservative Christians. And they endorse these views. And he says, we understand that they have dug their heels in their heels so deeply they will not be moved by anything, not fact. He's talking about people like us.
Amen.
Not facts or data or truth or their own eyes. We understand that there's no political scandal massive enough, no president's tweet reckless enough, no legislation predatory enough to alter their allegiance. We understand that the past 2 years of viciousness and ineptitude haven't tempered their passions but ignited them. We understand that the image of an angry white American male God is so burned into their brains that they see no conflict with a religion devoid of love or a world absent diversity or a theology made of malice. This is what they're saying about us. We understand that infidelity, dishonesty, obscenity, and cruelty are no longer liabilities to those they would have lead them. We understand that the Fox News poison has so fully circulated through their systems that truth is no longer necessary. We understand that white supremacists in the cabinet and Russian infiltration in our elections and children separated from their parents are acceptable collateral damage to winning. We understand that their capacity to rationalize away human rights atrocities now borders on complete delusion. Now, all of this is pointing the finger at themselves.
Yeah, I was gonna say, they're projecting.
This is them, but they're projecting it on us. And there's more that this guy has written, and this is just a small sample, where he talks about people like us, in fact implying that we don't know who God is. And that we're so afraid of anybody who looks different than we are, that we'll follow anybody that promises us a white American God.
Wow.
And elsewhere he talks about how he's for full LGBTQ rights. Anybody should be able to marry anybody they want to. All religions have truth. All religions are valid, et cetera, et cetera. Well, all that's simply denying the
He should look in
scripture.
the mirror and see who's God. He's
Yeah. But see, this guy here is being presented by people as a mainstream Christian. This guy will likely be here after the rapture takes place.
Oh, yeah, he would be. I don't believe he's
And so what are they going to say when people say, well, was that the rapture? Well, it couldn't have been, because the rapture is supposed to take away Christians, and I'm still here.
Look at Mayor Pete portraying himself.
Oh, yeah,
as a-
Pete Buttigieg portraying himself as the Christian candidate.
He's gonna
And-
solve the crime problem by making everything,
Legal.
legal.
Yeah, boy, that's one way you can do it. But yet he's releasing these statements that if you don't believe what he believes, you can't possibly be a true Christian. And there's all kinds of things that are coming together, but there is going, and kind of getting back to what you were asking about, I just realized how late it's getting. there's going to be a number of people after the rapture, I believe, who are going to realize, hey, this was really true. And it's going to get their attention, and they're going to come to Christ. And they're going to be
But once the
believers.
rapture takes place, the church is gone.
Right, we're
There's
caught
no
up.
more, so people that are left to come back to the
There's-
Lord, or the 144,000 what have you, they're part of something else, but they're not part of the church.
No, they're a different group. It just like the believers prior to the cross, there's a different group of believers, and the Jewish believers are a different group of believers, and the millennial saints are a different group of believers. But we make up a unique group called the Bride of Christ. That's from the cross to the rapture, basically. And so we're a specific group of believers. So anybody who comes to Christ after the rapture will not be a part of the Bride of Christ. And the Bride of Christ is whom John is taken to see the dwelling place of when he sees the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven. That's the home of the Bride of Christ. And then the nations of the earth walk in the light of it. So there's the nations on the earth, the new earth, after the millennium, during the new heaven and the new earth. There's nations made up of the Gentile nations from, before the cross, and the Gentile nations during the millennium, the Jewish people from, the time the Jewish people were brought into being, and the Jewish people from the millennial period, and the tribulation saints and all. They will make up the nations, and we will make up, as believers, the bride of Christ, and we'll be in that New Jerusalem. So anybody that comes to Christ during the tribulation, after the rapture, they'll be in a different group, but they will be in heaven. They will get to go, and they'll be in the new heaven and the new earth, but they will not be the bride of Christ. That's what's being completed right now with us. So,
They have different chores or works or
yeah.
things to do in heaven than.
Oh yeah, well, in the new heaven, the new earth, you've got nations, and you've got them worshiping God and bringing offerings into the to the Lord's presence, and so it's not like we're all going to be sitting on a cloud strumming a harp, eating Philadelphia cream cheese for all eternity. I like Philadelphia cream cheese, and harp music is pleasant, but I think a few thousand years of it would start getting a little old, unless God changed our desires considerably. But a new heaven and a new earth to explore for all eternity. Wow. With responsibilities and nations involved, we're supposed to rule and reign with Christ. So nations imply governments and activities and bringing, coming to worship the Lord and doing all kinds, implies all kinds of stuff happening for all eternity with no devil. No sin nature to contend with. So exciting things to look forward to.
I don't think nobody ever falls, let's see.
Well, one thing that you'll have in the new heaven and the new earth for all eternity, there will be the lake of fire where the smoke of their torment ascends up forever and ever. It'll always be there as a very stark token of what sin cost. And there'll never be any doubt, because prior to the fall, there wasn't anything like that. But after the new heaven and new earth, the lake of fire will exist for all eternity. Anybody has any doubts, all they have to do is look and they see that's what it costs. And we know. So, at any rate, let's go ahead and close in prayer. So, Heavenly Father, we want to thank you again for the opportunity we had tonight to talk about a number of things. And certainly a lot happening in the world around us today. Help us to be aware. To be watchful, Lord. The Bible talks about us watching and waiting and looking at the same time. We don't know when you're going to come back for us, as we've talked about before. We can hope and pray that you're coming back for us this year, but we need to work and pray as if we've got 10, 20 more years to go before you call us to be with you. In the meanwhile, Lord, just help us to be found faithful, doing the work you've given us to do. Keep us safe on the roads as we leave out of here tonight. Bless the day tomorrow. And bless the day on Sunday for your glory as well. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Do you hear any more about the big split in the Lutheran Church?
Over the LGBT or
The and male, female.
Well, is that the one where they had the transgender, priest or something?
No, there's supposed to be a big schism in Lutheran church about,
United Methodists is in the news today.
yeah, well, I'm sorry, the Methodists, the United Methodists,
How are you?
about the marriage, all he mentioned was the marriage thing, they didn't go into any other
I know,
detail.
Over same-sex marriage? or-
Yeah. And women pastors and the whole thing. I saw it. Well, I saw
Part
it.
of it.
Well, the Methodists have had women pastors up for a while.
Well, they're people that are trying to, from what I just saw, and it was on regular News 5, we were at dinner in the
Yeah,
restaurant,
that's
reading
right.
the headline, and he's showing the rainbow flag on one side and then traditional.
Yeah, sure you are. Anyways,
People that,
you're right.
maybe people are
Maybe
coming
it's that-
out and trying to go back to
That's a good
this.
question.
Yeah, we have seen some of that, because, there used to be an Anglican, or an Episcopalian church here locally,
In a pink
that
dress,
they
or a red
split
pink.
from the Episcopals nationally over I believe it was the homosexual priest issue or something.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Would you
Yeah.
call them the Divided Methodist Church?
Yeah,
Yeah, like.
Yeah, as opposed to United. Plus, over in Hudson, Presbyterian Church in Hudson, they had that happen, and they split from the Presbyterian, whichever group they were with, I can't think which one it is, but when they split, the denomination took their building from them and booted them out.
Yeah, they kept, I remember that, they kept.
Yeah, over here in Hudson. Why that's what happened with that Anglican church, or that Episcopalian church.
I think they were across
You
the
guys
street.
take care. The Episcopalian church is where that spa is in Gent. Take care. God bless. Yeah, you know that spa in Gent, down there in Gent? That was the Episcopalian church.
That was?
They,
I knew it was a church, but I didn't know that.
oh, okay, they moved from there, yeah, they went down to Bath. Did you know the Averys?
He was down there.
That you early had.
Cause we had,
Oh,
some people that we knew that went, when it was there in Gent, they went there.
As in, Mark's,
He was involved in music ministry.
that big refrigerator.
Tall, skinny
The
guy.
ice
Oh, you
cream
guys
stand.
I used to go to it when it was in Bath. I mean, when it was in,
Yeah. Then they moved down to Copley, just down by the I-577.
I don't know what it is, but that's the inside of it.
But yeah, wasn't that a case where it was,
You know, as
the
good as it
denomination
was,
took, tried to take the building or something?
a day or two later, another Mark's, they got a stainless steel. And I'm thinking, this one must have been made in China.
The one in Fairfax said that.
That's why.
And that's often-
It's upstairs.
Anger right now.
And this is a few years ago, and I got a real, Home Depot.
I was wondering where the term Episcopalian came from. And I was reading something recently, they said it came into use during the Revolutionary War, because they didn't want to say Anglican or Church of England.
Well,
So
you
they
know,
came up with the term
like I
Episcopal.
say, that price is so.
Well, just like,
It's like,
North Canada down here,
That's
during World War I, renamed itself from Berlin to North Canada.
Yeah.
It used to be called Berlin, but they didn't want to be identified as that, so they renamed themselves.
There's now Berlin.
I still just feel right there. I had
Mhm.
it. Sound
Right.
Well, I tried to get that. Well, I mean, so,
I should have.
Yeah.
After you get on the property, you see a whole
65 years old.
And, it was.
You just get your color.
Yep.
Yes, you can.
Well, tonight we're gonna sign off on YouTube tonight, so Happy New Year and God bless.
He had about 4 or 5 of them. That was over in Middleburg Heights, at his main store. Middleburg Heights, which is